Mao Mao is an orphan, an apothecary, a purveyor of disease, poison, and healing. She grew up in the pleasure district of Imperial China, a time between medieval and modernity. She is kidnapped and sold into servitude to the southern part of the royal court, forced to work to earn her freedom or risk execution. Alone and away from all she's ever known, Mao Mao is truly having the time of her life. Eat poison, solve crimes. This is the opening statement of Apothecary Diaries, one of the oddest and most engaging anime of the season. Set loosely around Ming Dynasty of China, Apothecary Diaries has become a certifiable hit, beating out even Jujutsu Kaisen and Frieren in some popularity polls. Apothecary Diaries is the antidote to the emotional epics and high-stakes battles that grip the season of anime, instead offering a more reserved slice of history that still delivers on its themes and its characters. Apothecary Diaries is one part political intrigue, one part detective drama, one part rom-com, and all Mao Mao. Mao Mao is our protagonist, and easily the star of Apothecary Diaries. While everything I have said in the opening of this video is true, by all accounts, Mao Mao has not lived an easy life. She has more than made the best of it, never offering a hint of self-pity for her situation. She is an apothecary after all, obsessed with her craft, and by obsessed, I mean she experiments with poisons on her own skin, ingests them to build up a tolerance, makes drugs and explosives for the lols. Basically, whatever could violate medical safety guidelines, she's done it with a smile on her face. Get someone who looks at you like Mao Mao looks at poison soup, and you will be set for life. In our opening episode with her, Mao Mao is kidnapped while out harvesting herbs and sold off to the palace to spend time working as a servant girl. And right off the bat, this anime hits us with something different. Now, I'm no historian, so what I say should be taken with a huge grain of salt, but the history of Imperial China is long, complicated, and fascinating at times. And this anime is not afraid to discuss the less regal bits of that history. This kidnapping is not simply a plot device, it was, back then, a legitimate issue and way for bad people to make good money. Mao Mao was well aware of this. She's not naive, and she's not some quirky fun anime girl who loves poisons but is stupid on anything else. She knew this could happen to her, to the point where she isn't really surprised or scared when it does. It's just a part of her life, and she got unlucky. She's sent to the Imperial Palace to work in the South Section, where many concubines and eunuchs of the Emperor operates, like its own mini-kingdom. Quick history lessons, by the way. You know when people discuss harems in anime, all these girls pining over one guy and he's too dumb to know what to do with them. Yeah, in real life, harems aren't actually like that. Harems were and are, in some parts of the world today, women of varying backgrounds and social statuses, sometimes of their own volition and sometimes not at all vying to give birth to a specific person's child, in this case, the Emperor. Now, Apothecary Diaries plays this a little safer, but it is still very straightforward. A concubine's life is tied to the Emperor, to serve him and to often be discarded once they fall out of favor. I was honestly surprised with how straight Apothecary Diaries plays the setting, even if it is a little toned down. This isn't just a pretty royal anime castle for romance. From day one, Mao Mao knows if she messes up, she or another person could very well die, or at least never get out of servitude. Even though she's not a concubine, she is a servant girl, arguably far more disposable. At least, that's what people see at first glance. And in a way, she's happy with that. If she keeps her head down and works off her service time, she could make it out of the castle without any trouble. She just shouldn't get involved. And then, two of the concubines, both with newly born children, get incredibly ill. Rumors spread accusations of curses, poisoning, sickness. The palace doctor, bless his heart, is an idiot, and each day it gets more and more likely that these concubines, these mothers, and their children will die, and no one can figure out what's wrong with them. But Mao Mao, she can. She realizes she shouldn't get involved, but she can't help it. She has seen this happen before. Mao Mao grew up in the pleasure district and was basically raised by the courtesans of a reputable brothel. They are her sisters, her mothers, and along with her adopted father, her family. And she has watched several of these family members die from using a specific makeup powder used to whiten faces. They tried to trade life for beauty and lost both, as Mao Mao said. And after seeing these concubines and hearing their symptoms, she is certain she knows what the answer is. She caves and leaves a note for both of them anonymously. Concubine Gyokyo reads the note and is able to save herself and her daughter's life, forever grateful for the small act of kindness that means so much to them. Concubine Lihua doesn't read the note. She ignores it. She ignores Lady Gyokyo's pleas, telling her about the poison, ignoring everything, until her child dies. We see the horrible aftermath. Apothecary Diaries is, for the most part, a lighthearted romp through a period of Chinese history, but that doesn't stop in dealing with the consequences of medicine, of lack of knowledge, of why people like Mao Mao are so important to the rest of us. This powder that kills mothers and babies was brought into the capital by the same servants sworn to care and protect these concubines, not out of maliciousness, but out of pure ignorance. The many eunuchs used as overseers of the palace didn't put two and two together when the issue arose. The doctor was unable to do anything because he is not properly trained. Gyokyo herself admits that she should have paid more attention to what was going into her child's mouth. As Gyokyo says, it truly is a sin to be ignorant. And that is why it is so important that Apothecary Diaries deals in a protagonist that is not ignorant. Mao Mao is handcrafted for this role, able to act both as a fun protagonist when the story is lighter in nature, and it often is, and far more serious when topics of death and illness and the cruel realities of this world arise. Mao Mao has an inherent drive for learning and problem solving, instilled in her by her adopted father and born out of a desire to help her makeshift family. She is wholly committed to her craft, so when she sees a doctor's incompetence is slowly killing two people and their newborn children, she literally could not stand by and do nothing. It goes against everything in her very being. In a world where ignorance normally has no challenger, Mao Mao's bluntness and her passion makes her not only the perfect doctor, but the perfect character to learn and teach others in this show. Though she plays an almost apathetic, detached role at times, Mao Mao is not mean-spirited. She takes no joy in the suffering of others, even if they've done wrong. But she is no pushover. In a matter of life and death, no matter how small, she will not hesitate to call anyone out when they deliberately put the lives of others in danger. And because she gets results, she gets away with it. And while she could have easily been written as a show-off or a power fantasy doctor, I think the combination of her sincerity and at times unhinged dedication makes it totally believable to me that she is so smart. It also makes her a perfect assistant to Jinshi, the young androgynous eunuch in charge of managing the rear palace. The second part of this apothecary's dynamic duo, Jinshi is a southern palace celebrity, fawned over by women and men alike. Jinshi is accustomed to the hum and drone of the palace, but is caught off guard by Mao Mao. He correctly deduces her identity as the servant girl who saved concubine Gyokyo's life and child, and seeing a well-learned apothecary just fall into his hands, the first person he has met to not fall for his charms, she immediately becomes his favorite person. And while normally this would immediately lead to romantic hijinks in other anime, this relationship is rather tame, usually. Jinshi is a good judge of character and quickly grows to trust Mao Mao and her skills, using her to solve other palace mysteries that often simply stem from a lack of life experience and medical knowledge. The palace is rather insulated, and Mao Mao's background offers her a huge advantage on solving many of these mysteries. And Jinshi's authority gives Mao Mao access and resources that most servants couldn't even dream of. They form a kind of symbiotic relationship, and though Mao Mao is at times creeped out by Jinshi, and she has every right to be, Jinshi really needs to learn some personal boundaries. They have an understanding of each other that neither seem to realize. Jinshi finds that he really does care for Mao Mao, beyond her usefulness, and he learns from her and her experiences. Mao Mao starts to see the man behind the show that Jinshi puts up to try to make it through the day, and perhaps he's not as callous and aloof as he first seems. The stories of the Apothecary Diaries are structured around this dynamic, Mao Mao using her life and Jinshi's support to interact with the mysteries and people of the palace. And the palace itself is a wondrous place for the setting. The class structure we see within this palace lends itself well to character dynamics and the new characters we meet, whether it's new concubines, their ladies-in-waiting, and other eunuchs or military men, even the silly doctor who's definitely crushing on Jinshi, are all connected in some way, as if the palace really is one large ecosystem or even a messed up family in some ways. But it's not perfect. Not everyone wants the balance to maintain. Hence, the rise in problems that Jinshi and Mao Mao are tasked with solving. Some problems are solved within the episode, telling smaller stories and expanding upon the times they live in, of harems and war, and of the injustices shown in the gaps of society. And sometimes they are threads that connect episode to episode. For example, Mao Mao's role, outside of generally solving crime, is acting as a lady in serving to Gyokyo, a job she was offered after saving the lady's life. And she now has the wonderful role of being Gyokyo's food taster because, at all points in times, the concubines of the emperor are at risk of assassination via poisoning. Now let me clarify, this is not a punishment for Mao Mao. Mao Mao loves this job. She is able to become an indispensable asset to the palace, and she gets to ingest poisons in a socially acceptable way. However, the very fact that there are instances of poisoning in the castle plays into the intrigue of this setting, as it seems everyone in the palace has a slim possibility of death hanging around them from really anything, intentional or otherwise. And as more and more of the political conspiracy begins to be uncovered, we start to wonder how much of this forced family conspire against each other. I promise it's not all doom and gloom in this show. There is downtime between these more serious beats and some truly endearing characters outside of the main two. Gao Shun is Jinshi's assistant, the straight man to his petulant child routine, and a hard worker who respects and often assists Mao Mao in her investigations. Li Shu is a young concubine who I believe canonically hasn't done anything with the emperor, and that's a good thing because she's clearly just a child trying her best to find the mother and friends she's never got a chance to have. Mao Mao's adopted father is a complex and quiet individual with quite the interesting past, and Gyokyo becomes an in-house mother-like figure for Mao Mao, even though their ages really aren't that different. Oh, and I almost forgot, Gyokyo's other ladies-in-waiting who bear the brunt of the comedic timing and slight lesbian undertones, but that's neither here nor there. It can be a lonely world, lost in the isolation of the southern castle, and bonds form between servants and concubines, regardless of how they started. And they're fascinating, and serve a mutual need to survive and to feel something akin to kinship. For their part, Mao Mao and Jinshi have a ton of personality outside of her good cop, bad doctor routine and his celebrity status. And it's really nice to see them not only interact with each other, but the rest of the cast. It's also particularly funny to see Mao Mao from an outside perspective because she's become almost a terrifying force of reckoning inside the palace, able to scare off ladies-in-wait with a single glare. And while I don't like all aspects of Jinshi's character, he is interesting and clearly has a lot more about him that we don't know yet. Insecurities, desires, and heritage that will almost certainly come into play later. And as a plus, it turns out, mild spoilers here if you want to skip for a few seconds, he's actually not much older than Mao Mao, at least according to the wiki, so that's definitely a relief to shippers. But beyond the medicine and the mysteries, the most important issue of Apothecary Diaries is what simply isn't conspiracy, but tragedy. A little tragedy that affects everyday life from the dawn of time to today. The sin of ignorance. Because nearly every conflict that occurs in this show is a byproduct of ignorance. In a time with no internet, with very little schooling, with servants not knowing how to read and write, with the scientific knowledge of the world scattered, and with the threat of insubordination leading to death, it is easy for people to not speak up, to not question, to not understand. The very first bout of ignorance we see in this series, as we talked about earlier, leads to the death of a child. This is not a joke. This incident while only one episode in, is played completely straight, and it's easy to put sole blame on the servants who brought that white powder. But it wasn't just them. Concubine Li Hui was told repeatedly what the problem was. She ignored it. It's hard to say why. Why risk it? Why was she so stubborn? Why was she willing to play with the life of a child to hold some sort of moral high ground? Did she hate Gyokyo so much that she would rather he die than ask for help? It wasn't worth it. It clearly wasn't worth it. And after the first episode, you kind of want to hate her. But the show is more mature than that. Mao Mao is more mature than that. We find out several episodes later that Li Hui is still ill, on the verge of dying. Mao Mao is asked indirectly by the emperor himself to save her. And Li Hui's ladies-in-waiting are rude to Mao Mao, doing their best to keep her away, not because they want Li Hui to die. If anything, they adore her. But they don't fully understand why Mao Mao is there. They think this is all some stupid sickness that will get better if Li Hui just eats. They are ignorant. They are so ignorant, it is revealed that the reason Li Hui is sick is because her servants are still putting that white makeup on her face. After it was banned from the palace, after they went around confiscating it from all servants, after it killed her child, her servants are still poisoning her unintentionally. They just want her to look pretty. Even though they've been told what that powder does, it doesn't compute. It still takes Mao Mao literally beating it into this servant for them to realize that they're killing the one person in the world who means the most to them. There are no thoughts in your head. You just think you know everything. Who would be happy, poisoned with the same thing that killed her son? Mao Mao does not hate Li Hui. She does not hate these servants. She hates that it has taken them so long to learn such a simple lesson. She hates how much pride and ignorance gets into the way of someone's actual health and well-being. She does not hate the person. She hates the disease of ignorance. And I started to understand. After a while, Li Hui begins to heal. Her servants don't poison her anymore. Though they still don't fully trust Mao Mao, they let her do her work. It's not a perfect ending. Her child is still gone. But Li Hui is alive. And she is grateful. Perhaps she's truly been cured of this sin. I think it's important now to look at Li Hui as a person. Concubine Li Hui, who, for all we know, has been a concubine all her life. She is 23. She has had one of the most dangerous and stressful jobs in the known world. She could die from childbirth. She could die from sickness. She could die from poisoning. She could die randomly from the emperor's distrust, from some poison that only a little apothecary girl happened to understand the true weight of. Though she has it better than many, she is not devoid of horrors or sorrow. She is human, and she made the biggest mistake she will ever make in her life, and it will haunt her forever. I think that's punishment enough. Li Hui's story is not wholly unique to anime, or most painfully, to real life. Apothecary Diaries has and will cover ignorance, as great, if not worse, than Li Hui's, and not everyone learns from their mistake, no matter how severe they are. But some do. That's what's important. Helping those who are willing to learn to be better to themselves and those around them. Outside of ignorance, Apothecary Diaries is, for the most part, a show without a central villain. There are antagonists, and not all of them are good or misguided intentions, but nearly every one of them feels some kind of remorse. They are flawed and human, and often they understand that what they do is not okay. Some of them find redemption in small things, some of them atone for their crimes, and one of them in particular has one of the most heartbreaking manga panels I have ever seen. But in every way, they are still ignorant, every member of the cast, every character, even Mao Mao at times is ignorant. But I think that showing that there is forgiveness and a chance to learn and grow even to the worst of these people solidifies a really nuanced message from this show about a silly 5-foot apothecary intimidating poor servant girls into following basic instructions. Now, I hope I didn't scare you off with a dive into the psychology of ignorance and the repercussions it has. Mao Mao and Jinshi and the rest of the cast of Apothecary Diaries, from the courtesans to the concubines to the eunuchs to the ladies-in-waiting, are a treat to watch, and the historical settings offer a well-needed break from the more traditional anime settings that we've seen this season. They are interesting and varied, and the animation of Apothecary Diaries, while not Frieren or Jujutsu Kaisen levels, is very pretty at times, and lends itself well to comedy. And again, Mao Mao is an amazing character. Understated and yet full of personality, if she didn't have such a high competition this season, she would without a doubt be considered quote-unquote best girl. Overall, if you want a show that has a Sherlock Holmes-Watson dynamic rolled into a petite apothecary and what is billed as the prettiest man who has ever lived, and are willing to engage in a healthy helping of science, a sprinkling of mystery, and a dash of murder, and an occasional dive into some darker conversations about ignorance and even just the more rough parts of the human experience, regardless of what age or empire you live in, Apothecary Diaries is just mature enough to hold that conversation with some honest-to-God charm. Well, thank you so much for watching. Please consider leaving a like, possibly a comment. That helps a ton with the algorithm. And if you want to see more videos like this, or have a good anime to recommend me, hit that subscribe button. And I'll see you next time.